Throughout the centuries, the Byzantine Empire maintained its position as one of the most enduring powers in history, stretching over more than 1,000 years. Its success was supported by an efficient administrative structure, a formidable military, and a complex economy that enabled the funding of its military campaigns and the maintenance of its vast bureaucracy. At the heart of this system, and often underappreciated, was the Byzantine taxation mechanism. More than just a revenue collection system, taxes shaped the social and economic dynamics of the empire, generating prosperity for some while creating oppression for others. This delicate balance between the need for taxation and its impact on different social classes was both a source of strength and weakness for the empire, helping to sustain it while eventually contributing to its decline. The early reforms, Diocletian, and the start of a lasting system, the Byzantine tax system, like many aspects of the empire's administration, was inherited and adapted from Roman practices. By the end of the 3rd century, the Roman Empire was in crisis. Uncontrolled inflation, currency devaluation, and the high costs of military campaigns and maintaining borders led to an economic collapse. When Diocletian took the throne, he recognized that a fiscal reform was essential to save the empire from imminent collapse. His solution was to implement a system of taxation in kind, rather than relying solely on taxes paid in currency. This change, which required peasants and landowners to pay their taxes by delivering part of their agricultural production to the state, was an attempt to stabilize the economy and ensure that the army and cities had sufficient supplies, even in times of monetary crisis. For the government, this measure brought greater control over the rural economy and more predictability in the flow of resources. However, for the peasants, this innovation imposed an even greater burden, as agricultural production could be affected by numerous factors, from adverse weather conditions to external attacks. Constantine the Great consolidated and expanded the system of taxation in kind that Diocletian had introduced. Under his reign, the empire developed a more centralized structure for tax collection, categorizing lands based on their productive potential. Each region of the empire was carefully measured, and the government imposed taxes that reflected the agricultural wealth of each estate. This sophistication allowed the empire to ensure a constant flow of supplies and revenues, but at the same time, made the tax system increasingly inflexible and demanding for small farmers. The impact on rural areas, oppression, debt, and the rise of the agrarian elite, the Byzantine tax system, especially in rural areas, was a double-edged sword. While it guaranteed resources for the government, it also placed an overwhelming burden on the peasant class, which made up the majority of the population. For small landowners, the land tax, or annona, was one of their main fiscal obligations. This tax required farmers to deliver a portion of their production to the government, regardless of the condition of the harvest. In years of good harvests, peasants were able to pay the tax and still support their families. However, in times of agricultural crises such as droughts, plagues, or invasions, farmers faced a difficult dilemma. Unable to pay their taxes, many peasants turned to large landowners or moneylenders for loans, which often came with exorbitant interest rates. This cycle of debt often resulted in the loss of small landowners' lands, which were absorbed by large estate owners or the church. This process of land expropriation had a devastating effect on the social structure of rural areas. With each generation, the number of small landowners decreased, while the land became increasingly concentrated in the hands of a wealthy agrarian elite. Peasants who lost their land were often forced to continue working on the same estates, now as tenants or serfs. This led to a significant increase in inequality in rural areas and a growing sense of despair among the peasant population. The rise of the agrarian elite, who benefited from the expropriation of land, also brought with it a concentration of economic and political power. Large landowners began to exert greater influence over local governance, and in many regions, acted as de facto rulers, controlling both the economy and political life of the areas under their control. This contributed to a gradual decentralization of power in the empire, with the central government in Constantinople increasingly struggling to assert its authority in the most distant regions. The psychological and social impact of land loss for Byzantine peasants. Land was not just a source of sustainability, but also a symbol of status and independence. land ownership provided not only economic security, but also a place within the social structure of the empire. When peasants lost their land, they also lost their autonomy and social standing, becoming dependent on large landowners or the church. The loss of land also had a profound psychological impact. A peasant, now deprived of his property, found himself in a position of vulnerability and uncertainty. The security that land ownership provided vanished, replaced by dependence on landlords who held economic and political power. The fear of losing land was a constant concern for peasants, making them more likely to submit to the demands of the landowners, perpetuating a cycle of exploitation and inequality. This rural impoverishment generated discontent in various regions of the empire. The inability of many peasants to retain their land and the growing concentration of property in the hands of a wealthy agrarian elite created an unbridgeable gap between rich and poor. This social and economic disparity not only weakened the social fabric of rural communities, but also led to political instability, fueling uprisings throughout the centuries. Urban taxation. Economic oppression in the cities. If in rural areas the Byzantine tax system oppressed the peasants, in the cities the situation was different, but no less unfair. While farmers were subject to the annona, in urban areas merchants and craftsmen faced the burden of the chrysargeron, a tax on commercial transactions. This levy was applied to every transaction, making it difficult for small business owners to keep their businesses profitable. Imagine a small merchant in Constantinople, the capital of the empire and one of the world's largest commercial centers. Every sale he made in the market resulted in a significant portion of his profit being handed over to the government in the form of taxes. To survive, many small merchants were forced to raise the prices of their goods, which in turn drove away customers, creating a cycle of economic loss. Meanwhile, large merchants, often connected to the ruling elite, were able to avoid these taxes through exemptions or bribes. This disparity between small traders and large merchants created an environment of inequality in Byzantine cities. While a small elite prospered, the majority of the urban population struggled to survive under relentless fiscal pressure. This inequality created constant tensions, which in times of crisis exploded into revolts and social conflicts. The Nika Revolt, a turning point. Popular dissatisfaction with the tax system and corruption among tax collectors culminated in several revolts throughout Byzantine history, the most famous being the Nika Revolt in 532 AD. During the reign of Justinian, the city of Constantinople witnessed one of the greatest insurrections the empire had ever seen. The revolt began as a conflict between chariot racing factions in the city's hippodrome, but quickly escalated into a popular uprising against the government. Increased taxes, corruption among tax collectors, and the exploitation of the lower classes were at the heart of the discontent that led to the revolt. For days, the city was engulfed in a wave of violence and destruction, resulting in the deaths of tens of thousands of people and the burning of much of Constantinople. Although Justinian managed to brutally suppress the revolt, the episode made it clear that the Byzantine tax system was eroding the foundations of society, generating a level of discontent that threatened the empire's stability. The Nika Revolt was a turning point, not only because it exposed the flaws in the tax system, but also because it highlighted the role of the elite in exacerbating the crisis. Large landowners and merchants, who benefited from tax exemptions and their proximity to the government, became the targets of popular anger. The revolt showed that the tension between social classes was becoming unsustainable and that the Byzantine government would need to find ways to alleviate the pressure on the lower classes to avoid future uprisings. The elite and the church, beneficiaries of the tax system. While most of the population was crushed by taxes, the Byzantine elite, composed of large landowners, high-ranking officials, and military leaders, enjoyed tax privileges that allowed them to accumulate vast fortunes. These tax exemptions granted by the government were seen as rewards for political loyalty and military service, but, in practice, contributed to the growing inequality between the rich and the poor in the empire. The Byzantine Church, one of the most powerful institutions in the empire, also played a significant role in the tax system. As one of the largest landowners, the church was often exempt from taxes, which allowed it to amass great wealth. At the same time, The church was one of the empire's main sources of charity, offering aid to the poor and needy during times of crisis. However, the church's ambiguous role in the tax system generated both admiration and resentment. For many peasants and urban citizens, the church was a source of relief in times of hardship, but also an institution that benefited from the same tax privileges that contributed to their poverty. This paradox between charity and tax privilege was one of many tensions that permeated Byzantine society. The concentration of land in the hands of the elite and the church also had a profound impact on the political structure of the empire. In many regions, large landowners acted as local rulers, controlling both the economy and politics in the areas under their influence. This contributed to the decentralization of power, with the central government in Constantinople increasingly struggling to impose its authority in distant provinces. As the agrarian elite gained more power and influence, the central government lost control over peripheral regions, weakening the empire's cohesion. The decentralization of power and fiscal decline over time. The decentralization of power became a growing problem for the Byzantine government. As large landowners and local leaders amassed more wealth and power, they became increasingly independent from the central government. In many regions, these landowners acted as de facto rulers, resisting Constantinople's attempts to collect taxes or enforce its laws. This decentralization of power had several consequences. First, it weakened the central government's ability to collect the necessary taxes to sustain the army and imperial administration. With fewer revenues coming from the provinces, the Byzantine government was forced to increase taxes in the areas still under its control, exacerbating the cycle of poverty and discontent. Secondly, the loss of control over peripheral regions led to political fragmentation, with many provinces falling under the control of foreign powers, such as the Arabs and Bulgarians, or becoming virtually autonomous. The loss of important territories, such as Egypt and Syria, to the Arabs in the 7th century was a devastating blow to the empire, depriving it of some of its richest and most productive regions. Without these provinces, the empire lost a crucial source of tax revenue, further weakening its economic and military base. Taxation and diplomacy. Using taxes as a political tool in addition to its role in internal revenue collection, the Byzantine tax system was also an essential tool in the empire's foreign diplomacy. Rather than engaging in constant and costly wars, Byzantine emperors often chose to pay tributes to foreign powers in exchange for peace. This strategy of buying peace allowed the empire to avoid prolonged conflicts with powerful enemies, such as the Persians and Arabs, but it also had its drawbacks. Paying taxes to foreign enemies required the government to raise taxes on its own population to finance these transactions. This created a cycle in which the Byzantine population was constantly burdened with new taxes, increasing social discontent and internal instability. Furthermore, paying taxes weakened the empire's position on the international stage, as it signaled that Byzantium preferred to pay to avoid conflicts, which encouraged other enemies to demand the same. Over the centuries, this dependence on taxes as a diplomatic tool drained the empire's resources and contributed to its weakening. While paying taxes avoided wars in the short term, it also undermined the empire's ability to invest in its own defense and long-term economic development. The legacy of the Byzantine tax system. The Byzantine tax system was one of the empire's most important institutions, sustaining its military, administrative, and economic operations for centuries. However, it was also one of the main causes of its social and political instability. The constant pressure on the lower classes, combined with the tax exemptions granted to the elite, created a level of inequality that eroded the empire's social cohesion. As the tax system became increasingly oppressive, the empire struggled to maintain its authority and collect the resources necessary for its survival. The fragmentation of power in the provinces, the loss of territories, and the growing social inequality were direct results of a system that, while efficient at its core, failed to balance the needs of the state with those of its population. In the end, the Byzantine tax system serves as a warning about the dangers of a fiscal model that favors the elites at the expense of the lower classes. A system that generates inequality and poverty inevitably weakens the state, creating the conditions for its decline and eventual collapse. The legacy of the Byzantine tax system, therefore, is a lesson in the importance of social justice and fiscal balance for the maintenance of a stable and prosperous society.